Okay, let's finish our conversation about the wound of the betrayed king. Because this is what I've discovered. It is a deeper human pattern that is happening under the workplace story. It's not about royalty or status. It's about an archetype that describes what happens when someone gives their strength, their loyalty, their protection, their labor, their leadership energy to something that they truly believe in, only to later realize that what they served did not honor, protect, or reciprocate the same amount of devotion. So the more that I thought about this wound, this archetype, the more that I knew that this was so much bigger than just myself, that this was something that many organizations experience, but very few fully examine, and that is the hidden human cost of broken trust. Okay, so let's take a look at it. On the surface, workplaces often measure success through growth, productivity, or outcomes, and those metrics, they matter. But beneath every metric are people, human beings whose motivation, confidence, nervous systems, and sense of dignity are shaped by the environment that they work within. And those conditions determine the sustainability of the metrics that are being measured. So when harm shows up or lingers under the surface without being examined, sustainability no longer becomes a result. Okay. Sometimes harm in organizations is obvious, but more often than not, it's subtle. And harm can look like something along the lines of chronic overuse of dependable people, misalignment between contribution and recognition, silence where truth is needed. Harm can look like transitions that are handled procedurally, not humanely, and high performers appearing to be fine while quietly deteriorating on the inside. Okay? So we're going to use one employee exit, mine, to look through the lens of a larger leadership reality here. Not to blame and not to revisit the past for its own sake, but to bring language to patterns many professionals endure and many leaders unintentionally create. Because when trust is broken, the extent of that cost goes far beyond one recognition or one termination. It reaches morale, it reaches retention, it reaches innovation culture, it reaches families, and it reaches future confidence. Okay, so when trust is protected, the opposite can be possible as well. People can thrive, teams can strengthen, leadership earns their loyalty, and organizations become healthier and more sustainable. So why am I sharing all of this? I spent over a decade inside healthcare learning about systems and helping build those systems and then improving those systems, training teams, supporting growth and carrying responsibility that mattered. So when I decided to officially leave, I realized something important, that what had happened to me was not one single event. It was a sequence of events and experiences that led up to my decision to depart. Okay, so many professionals go through similar experiences without ever finding the language for it. So my hope in this conversation is to invite deeper awareness, wiser leadership, and more humane systems, because the way that we lead people matters long after the workday ends. So let's start with how harm rarely begins at someone's exit. Okay. Most organizations focus on the visible events, the resignation, the termination, and the restructuring, but leadership requires to see far beyond that final event. And in my experiences, it has taught me that an exit is often not the beginning of the story, but it is the consequence of one that has been unfolding for some time. Okay, so let me explain. Long before someone leaves, there typically has already been some form of unresolved misalignment, meaning things were no longer working the way that they should. Overuse without reciprocity. In my experience, I was giving I was giving more than receiving in support and respect. A slow deterioration of trust over time. Emotional strain hidden beneath professionalism. For me, I was struggling internally while still appearing professional on the outside. And then there were repeated signals and just signs that things were no longer fair, right? So fairness had officially left the building. And by the time that the departure becomes visible, the deeper issues were present for months, and in my case, years prior to that. So it's important to recognize that strong leadership isn't only about managing exits, it's about recognizing the conditions that create them. And what appears sudden on the surface is often a accumulation of events underneath. So to understand an employee's exit accurately, we have to examine the full sequence of events that lead up to it, the contribution that led to the misalignment that led to the erosion that obviously leads to the transition into the exit, and then looking a little bit further than that and looking at the aftermath and then the recovery, because my story followed this pattern exactly to the T. All right, so let's start with stage one, high contribution or contribution in general. For years, I was relied upon, solving problems, building systems, training teams, keeping things moving, keeping important functions moving, and carrying responsibility. And what did that look like? Well, it looked like creating workflows, flowcharts, cheat sheets, guides, manuals, training checklists, training courses, training material and resources for in-person and virtual training. I traveled, created policies, maintained the intranet for the corporate offices, and then ended up maintaining and updating the resources and material for the franchise intranet. Compliance, I did the full implementation process for the EMR, the PM, the patient engagement platform, the various scheduling platforms that we had, the LMS, so the learning management system platform, the clinical decision-making platforms. I created the resources and the materials and implemented the new laboratory tests that came to the clinics. And it was front end, back end, it was provider, it was center administrator, it was OCMed, WorkComp. Implementing the purchasing management platforms, created an outline for provider onboarding. I worked with IT. I created RCM processes, training and material for the maintenance portal. I created training for franchise business consultant leadership. I also, if it touched the corporate operations, I created the foundational resources that are still being used today for it. And then that trickles over into franchise, so franchise as well. And then also created the training material for our, for the new franchise business owners, so they can understand how the clinic works at full scale, from start to finish, from construction site to, from real estate to the end of the operational working day. So if it touched the business of urgent care, I created the foundational material for it. So I carried a lot of responsibility. And like many high performers believe, if I give deeply to an organization, then I will reciprocate fairly. And that belief shaped how much, I gave. And that is the reason why I gave so much. But it also shaped how much I was willing to carry as well. Because at that time, I viewed this season as success through effort, right? So I was solving problems, I was carrying responsibility, I was producing results, I was, in my eyes, being dependable. Everyone counted on me. I always received phone calls all the time and helped people out. So naturally, one would interpret that as success through effort, right? The idea that hard work, loyalty, and competence would create progress and safety within the organization. And looking back now, I also know and understand that it was a very formative chapter for me, one that developed the ability to build capability through the challenges that I experienced, building resilience and strength through the pressure that I was under, It sharpened my discernment through the disappointments that I had endured, and it developed my leadership skills through lived experiences. Not something that I read in a book, but through lived experiences, trial and error. So while I thought I was building value for the organization, in hindsight, life was actually building value within inside me. But there is a hidden cost and a hidden risk to being highly useful. As my value grew, so did the demands that were placed upon it, right? Over time, I learned that usefulness can become dependency, and dependency, if left unchecked, can become exploitation. What began as a valuable, contribution gradually turned into an expectation. So often and so gradually that it was very difficult to recognize it in real time. Some examples would be, giving extra effort and it becoming normalized. Reliability became assumed. Stepping in became automatic for me, and more responsibility arrived without equal support. So because I was capable, the load kept increasing, and because I was dependable, the need kept returning. I remember hearing, oh, give it to Stephanie. Oh, give it to Stephanie. Give those to Stephanie. Give this and that, and she'll mix it up and make it great, and just give it to Stephanie. Stephanie's handling it. You can ask anyone. Let's be clear, though, about something that I had discovered after I left, okay? Let's give an honest definition here to what exploitation is. Exploitation is when an organization receives disproportionate value from someone without proportionate support, protection, or return. Okay? In other words, when organizations benefit significantly from someone's work, talent, loyalty, or effort, but failing to provide fair support, protection, compensation, recognition, or sustainable conditions in return. And if you need a shorter definition, it's when organizations keep receiving without giving back. Okay. So from the outside to me, this looked like success. I was trusted, needed, consistently counted on. And looking back now, I learned that not every arrangement appears successful is balanced. Because internally, I was becoming depleted. The energy that I was putting in was being spent faster than I was being able to restore it. And resentment began to emerge where reciprocity was absent. Confusion began to grow when what was praised privately behind closed doors was not supported publicly. And the strength that made me valuable was slowly being used against my own well-being. And this is where the next phase of misalignment comes into play at. Misalignment is when output and recognition diverge. Eventually, a widening gap began to emerge between, what I was carrying, how I was positioned, and how recognition was implemented. It was not only a structural gap, but it was a relational one. Something in the environment no longer felt aligned, and before I could fully, explain it. And what's interesting is that this is where someone's intuition actually grows. For those in the back, intuition often senses distance before language catches up. It is only a matter of time before the language finally catches up for the experiences that's going on. So, even though my title had dissolved at this point and my position downgraded and moved to another arm of the business, and the opportunities that I believed that I earned did not materialize, I didn't allow it to destabilize my identity or my future trajectory. I didn't allow the situation to feel like a punishment because I knew that I didn't do anything wrong. I still believed in the mission. I believed that I was doing something bigger than myself. And regardless of office politics, I believed that if the universe did not want me to ascend to the next level, then there had to have been a reason for it, and I needed to be patient and wait for that reason. However, what had changed externally around me really started to affect me internally. Okay, it started to change me internally. And with each new shift, I began to feel this widening gap between contribution and return, between what was stable in effort and what became unstable in structure. And so this emotional undercurrent began to build within me, the uncertainty yet certainty, because the business needed my skills and my abilities and my knowledge, right, and my craft. But disappointment and distance and grief for what I was believing that was going on around me. So if I could give you a deeper realization, it's this, that recognition is not only about compensation or title, it's also about clarity, about fairness, about visibility, about a sense that contribution is anchored to something that's solid. Okay, and when those foundations begin to move unexpectedly, people often feel unsettled long before they choose to leave. So let's talk about the true meaning of the injury that occurred here. I think that's important to state. Leaders often think that title disappointment is about ego, but it's not. It's something deeper. Sometimes it's this internal disruption that occurs, years after giving effort and sacrifice, which no longer seems to connect to meaning, growth, or future opportunities. When someone has invested deeply, misalignment can feel like invisibility despite contribution. It can feel like utter betrayal, confusion, and just this emotional grief for a chapter that ended differently than expected, And this is why these moments carry more weight than they appear on paper. And that's something to take into consideration. Humans are naturally motivated not only by pay or position, but by purpose, by trajectory, by belonging, and, a hope that sincere effort is building towards something that is worthwhile. So when that light dims unexpectedly, the injury is not merely professional. It's existential. You see, there is a psychological contract that happens between an employee and an employer, whether it's explicitly stated or not. And when that contract breaks, that's where the erosion of the foundation of trust starts to take place. So later in the later season of my employment, the environment began to change in more obvious ways. And what had once felt like connection began to feel like conflict. What once felt clear became harder to read through a honorable lens of goodwill. I experienced colder communication among peers, if any communication at all. I experienced isolation and social exclusions from meetings, conversations, collaborations, and then later access to the platforms that I needed. I experienced intimidation, physical positioning of asserted dominance and body language that stated, we control this space. Using rank and access, I assumed to make me feel smaller than I was already. You see, intimidation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's repeated behavior that teaches someone to feel unsafe, powerless, or diminished. I experienced ambiguity, a lack of clarity, right? So projects that were told were high importance were completed only to be told that they were no longer needed. I experienced emotional, relational strain, growing emotional distance, obviously, and then just like the classic taking credit for my work to erase my contribution and to weaken my reputation. Okay, so I no longer felt like a contributor at this point. I felt like a problem. And what I learned is that trust rarely breaks in one dramatic moment. It often dissolves through subtle contradictions, mixed signals, unresolved tension, and the gradual loss of relational and psychological safety. Okay, people usually feel this shift before they can even explain it. All right, so this is what many leaders miss. about this sort of situation is that the body tracks the environment even when the employee keeps performing. While I was still working, smiling, and producing, I also carried stress vigilance, right? I was always on edge or on alert for the next thing to drop. Sleep disruption. I was not getting enough sleep. I would lay in bed and wonder why this was happening. Who was connected to who? What am I not seeing? Just ruminating on the whole situation. Emotional exhaustion, right? Feeling emotionally drained. Anxiety, the constant nervousness, growing distrust, and the urge to withdraw and self-isolate even more to protect myself. So from the outside, I may have looked functional, but on the inside, internally, my energy was being redirected towards survival instead of towards creativity, trust, and growth. And this is why people often lead emotionally before they leave physically. And what's interesting here is that when distance creates room to breathe, healing can begin. All right, so when I began to distance myself, which was giving my nervous system space to stop reacting and start observing, what that did is allow me an opportunity to start studying my environment. Right, I stopped trying to prove myself in every situation. I stopped trying to explain things, protect my name. I stopped trying to protect my work. I stopped trying to anticipate the next move and decode what was happening. Right, I just surrendered to observation. I began to see patterns more clearly when I did this. I could see the conflict. I could see the hidden dynamics. I could see the web of secret relationships that were going on and the conversations that were going on. I could also see the cost of engagement. Old loyalty wounds began to surface, that I had to deal with. Do I want to engage with this individual? Do I trust this individual? Do I still see this person as loyal? Is this someone that I want to respect? So those wounds surfaced and I had to figure that out. And then I could see just the utter exhaustion of the entire situation finally. And what's interesting is that I also saw how a new life was trying to emerge. So I became very unbothered to the illusion that was being put on display in this distorted and competitive environment happening around me. And because of that, my clarity returned, my energy returned, a sense of hope returned, and the power of observation gave me my authority back. So when I say that hope returns, I don't mean naivety. I don't mean dismissing or pretending that nothing happened or waiting for someone to come and rescue or, repair what was broken. What I mean is that hope returned as clear sight instead of confusion. The fog lifted. Discernment instead of denial. I stopped denying that this wasn't the circumstance. I just accepted it that it was. Boundaries instead of overextension. When someone came to me with a problem, I didn't take it over as myself. I didn't take it on personally. I allowed them to handle it themselves. And I merely sat and said, I created boundaries. Truth instead of mixed signals. Self-respect instead of self-abandonment. Yeah, and a sense of calmness and wisdom instead of this emotional chaos. So it wasn't wishful thinking, it was mature hope, the kind that emerges after experiences have sharpened your perception. And once hope returned, that is when I decided to officially begin my transition out of the company. I didn't walk away abruptly, okay? I gave a 6-week notice, right? I'm only obligated to 2, and that decision matters because reflects a desire to leave with maturity, with contribution and stability, rather than resentment and disruption. I still wanted to transition responsibly. I wanted to help the continuity of the business. I had been there for 11 years, 5 of which were in corporate. I dabbled in all of the areas and the arms of the business. I had a lot that I needed to transition. And I wanted to leave respectfully, and preserve whatever relationship were possible, and then contribute in just like an orderly handoff, and that was goodwill. And it was also evidence that disappointment that I had felt did not erase my professionalism. And what I now understand is that even in the endings of employment, many people still want to try to build something constructive, right? Some departures are not acts of destruction, they are actually final acts of integrity. So I stayed as long as I could, which was 4 of the 6 weeks. 2 of those weeks of which my resignation remained a secret. So during that time, I sensed this continuing, growing deception happening behind the scenes, right? Trust that was already strained, completely deteriorated. And what could have been a collaborative transition began to feel like misalignment and mismanagement. So it's important because this is important to recognize, because notice periods can become periods of opportunity, right? They can become seasons of knowledge transfer, of appreciation, of relationship closures, of shared professionalism and future goodwill. Or they can expose poor communication, withheld truth, power imbalances, avoidance, and relational immaturity. And at that point, it stopped being about employment status for me and started to become about my integrity. How people are treated in that final chapter often reveals what the culture truly was all along. So many professionals know this moment very well, the moment where staying becomes more damaging than leaving, when the cost of remaining exceeds the benefit of enduring. And my early departure wasn't impulsive. It was boundary enforcement. It was nervous system protection. It was the refusal to normalize dishonesty, a sense of self-respect, and just the recognition that energy must be invested where reciprocity exists. Sometimes the wisest move is not to continue proving loyalty. It is to redirect that effort towards contributions where redirect that effort towards environments where trust, contribution, and fairness can actually grow. And leaving then becomes more than an exit, and it did for me. It became the beginning of something to rebuild. So let's talk about that exit, okay? On paper, the final process looks complete, right? The final day process, the email sent, the access removed, belongings packed up, pick-up and drop-off day scheduled, and paperwork finished. From an administrative perspective, it looks efficient. But human transitions are rarely experienced through paperwork alone. In lived reality, I felt a loss of identity, a loss of routine, uncertainty about what comes next, grief for what had been invested, just gone overnight. And then an emotional shock for how quickly that chapter ended. And what this reveals is that systems often measure closure externally while people experience them internally. An organization may believe the matter is finished because the checklist is complete, but for the person living it, it is more often than not just the beginning of the process, and that gap matters. So let's talk about the next day that happened. Let's talk about what happened the next day. All right, the day after the separation date was officially finalized and I received the email, life insurance representatives showed up at my home and knocked on my door. They claimed that it was a personal referral-based outreach. And they insisted that I signed up for this life insurance. And they even gave me a sign-up offer of the first 3 months for free. Right? And they used fear-based stories. They told me about a gentleman that they had signed up, and about a week later he had died of a heart attack, and his family was incredibly grateful that he had signed up, and they came by whenever they came by. And after everything was done and finalized and signed, they asked if I had any friends or family in Alabama that I could refer, but I couldn't refer outside of Alabama. Now, I can't verify how they obtained my personal information and my address, and I do not need to create a narrative outside of what I already know. That would be irresponsible. But psychologically, what I know is that after everything that had happened, it felt very invasive, deeply, deeply mistimed, and frankly unsettling. You see, after significant disruption, people are often more sensitive. So the issue wasn't necessarily about them coming by. The issue was my condition while they arrived, right? So after prolonged strain, broken trust, years of adapting to stress and control dynamics and ambiguity and emotional depletion, the nervous system can become more reactive to uncertainty, coercion, or mixed motives, and interpret those pressure moments more differently than they otherwise would. And that's not irrationality, that is just accumulative impact. You see what I'm saying? And this is important for leaders to understand, because people do not leave organizations as blank slates. Okay, they leave carrying the emotional residue of the system that they left, that they had endured and then left. And when enough unresolved pressure has built up over time, even ordinary moments like this can feel amplified. Okay, so here's a new way to take a look at all of this that I think it's important for leaders to put inside of their training material, because this is what I learned from this experience. What I've come to understand is that difficult experiences can be interpreted in more than just one way. And the meaning that we assign to them determines whether we remain trapped in that wound or that pain or that experience, or we begin to heal from it. So I want to look at this from two separate lenses. From the lens of the victim, unhealed, and then the lens of the healed, right? So let's start with the unhealed. Now, I could have interpreted every single significant event through the lens of pain for this, right? Proof that everyone was against me, permanent victimhood, powerlessness, identity built on that pain, that injury, and assign hidden meaning to every single difficult moment. You see, when trust has been broken, the mind often searches urgently for an explanation, and it tries to create certainty out of confusion. And that response is human. But when pain becomes the only interpreter, perception narrows and growth stalls. I talked about this on a previous LinkedIn post. Many people get stuck there. And I've watched this happen throughout my entire life. Just people getting stuck in their pain and unable to move past it. When people get stuck there, it's not because they're weak. It's because just unsolved wounds can distort the meaning of the event long after the event has passed. Understandable? Human. Got it. But let's look at it through a new lens. Let's look at it through a healed lens, okay? Healing doesn't deny the harm. It doesn't deny the mistreatment or, rewrite the past. It simply interprets that experience with greater truth and less self-destruction. So instead, I learned to interpret my story differently, and my story went something along the lines of this. I gave deeply inside a system that did not contribute very well. I experienced misalignment, exploitation, under-recognition, relational strain. I experienced tension, stress, and the distortion of the quality of the relationships between me and groups of people. And that collapsed trust. And the deepest wound was not one isolated event. It was accumulation, breakdown of trust that preceded those events. And seeing it through this lens brought a new kind of intelligence and awareness to the situation. Stronger perception, clearer perception, stronger discernment. I was able to have honest communications with myself about what had happened. The ability to separate fact from fear. And the wisdom to understand that painful events can redirect life, not define it. And what I've always known to be true, just experienced in different ways throughout my life, is that some events, they arrive to close chapters, and others arrive to awaken new ones. All right? So let's look at this from a somatic perspective, okay? Because my body carried the aftermath of everything that happened, as does anyone's body that goes through life events. And this explains why later events felt very charged for me. The nervous system often remembers what the mind is still trying to organize. And that's important because healing requires more than just new thoughts. It requires restoring the safety internally in your body. And during this time, I had a great deal going on, not just in the professional life of it, but also the personal life. I was going through separation and divorce, legal processes, custody conflicts, parental alienation, emotional grief, financial pressures, and just general uncertainty about where my life was going to go. And so how does one heal internally with so much going on? What does that look like? Well, let's talk about what it looked like for me. It looked like nervous system recovery, being able to help my body calm down after being in stress mode for far too long. It looked like creating boundaries to protect my time, my energy, and my peace more clearly. It looked like resting, giving myself permission to slow down and recover. It looked like reclaiming my dignity, remembering that my worth is not tied to how people treat me. It looked like rebuilding self-trust, learning how to trust my own judgment and instincts again. Allowing the body to believe that the danger had passed, and that was a big one. I needed to teach myself that I was now safe and that I no longer needed to stay on guard. Significant events, you see, don't just happen in calendars or careers. They happen in the body as well. And sometimes the real turning point to all of this is not when something has ended. It's really when you finally understand what had been done and choose to heal from it. Okay? All that to say this to our leaders. Is that you are not only managing payroll, headcounts, transitions, budgets, staffing plans. Okay? You are also shaping the foundation that people live and stand on each and every single day. You're influencing trust, nervous systems, family stress that's carried home. You're influencing future confidence, employee identity, stability of morale, and the willingness for your employees to contribute again. And just like somatic work, leadership is root work as well. What is planted in culture eventually shows up in performance. What is neglected below the surface eventually appears above it. Builders understand this principle very well, that strong outcomes require strong foundations. If the roots are stained, the system is weak. If the foundation is cracked, growth is expensive. If people don't feel secure, productivity is going to come from survival base instead of purpose driven. The strongest leaders do not build just revenue. They build environments where people can grow. Because in every single policy, every conversation, every promotion, every transition, every ending, that adds another brick to the structure that people are living inside. Healthy cultures are not built on overgiving, they're built on reciprocity. Which brings me to something that I would like every leader to consider looking at, which is a more humane offboarding model, right? Strong exits do more than end employment. They bring clarity, they reduce conflict, and they help people move forward with dignity. A healthy offboarding process includes something along the lines of direct truth delivered clearly and respectfully. It looks like acknowledgement of real contribution, gratitude for what was built together, transition, support, and practical next steps, calm conflict management instead of power struggles, one clear point of contact, and no gossip, no retaliation, no punishment, no slander, no character assassination, no revision of someone's history after they leave. And a path that allows both sides to move forward cleanly. Something to think about. You see, the goal isn't merely separation, it's resolution. And when it's done well and handled well, endings can create relief instead of resentment. They can create wisdom instead of division, and they can create momentum instead of emotional residue. How an organization ends relationships often reveals more about its character than how it begins them. So, what did I experience through all of this? What did it give me? Well, today I carry more than lessons. I carry a renewed sense of myself, a renewed relationship with myself. I carry sharper discernment, stronger boundaries, grounded self-worth. I know who I am. I carry compassion for others navigating the unseen struggles. I carry trust within my own judgment. And I carry a clarity about what alignment feels like and looks like for me. I no longer confuse giving with value, and I look for reciprocity in every single situation and relationship. What once felt like loss became development for me. And this experience did not reduce me, it refined me. I lead differently now. I carry longer vision. I know what I bring to the table, and I no longer seek external validation or permission to do anything differently. It taught me that endings can restore what overgiving once depleted. That moving forward sometimes begins with choosing yourself. What I lost was temporary, but what I gained was foundational. Pain became instruction. Pain became a catalyst that allowed for a collapse that created space for rebuilding, which I am grateful for. So here's my final thought. What I learned is that the hidden cost of broken trust isn't always measured in numbers alone. Okay? It's carried in the hearts of people who gave sincerely. It's in the confidence and the light that was dimmed. The hidden cost is carried in the burdens that are carried home. In the quiet ways that people learn how to protect themselves where they once hoped that they had belonged. And yet there is another truth that is just as powerful. And that is when trust is honored, repaired, and protected, the opposite can happen as well. People can grow, teams can prosper, leadership finally becomes worthy of the loyalty that they were looking for all along. And organizations become a place where human beings do not merely work, but they thrive. Because leadership at its highest form is not domination, it is stewardship, it is truth, it is grace, it is the strength that is guided by wisdom and compassion. Because what happened to me matters. And what I learned from this experience matters more. And what you as leaders choose to do with this insight actually matters the most. So I hope you take this information and you learn from it and you grow from it. So you guys have a great day.